pregnant with Mr. Ham's child after knowing him for only 2 months. You are certain that you are not the father of her child.
Me and Brittany has the same exact car, just different colors. She was looking pretty, too, I'm not gonna lie. When we switched numbers, we started talking on the phone within those same exact hours. One of her female friends comes up to the car and say, well, your boyfriend is getting upset due to the fact that you over here disrespecting him by talking to another man.
Yes, I did have a boyfriend at the time.
You did.
But that wasn't him.
But that
was just the first boy. That was
my boyfriend.
Second boyfriend.
That was my
That's
first
the second boyfriend.
So
As this emotional journey reaches its final stage, the weight of truth has now settled into every heart involved. The courtroom process has stripped away speculation, assumption, and wishes. What remains is fact, and the requirement to adjust one's emotional reality to align with it. This is where the true meaning of truth changes. Everything becomes clear. The DNA test is no longer just a medical report. It becomes a symbol of accountability. It becomes the foundation upon which a future must now be built. The individuals, in this case, stand before Judge Lauren Lake no longer asking what if, but instead confronting what now. When the DNA results establish paternity, the emotional landscape transforms. A parent must take on responsibility fully, even if the circumstances that led to the child's conception were complicated, chaotic, or unexpected. Relationships formed, quickly or impulsively, may not have been built to last, but children born from them require consistency, support, and emotional availability. The past cannot be undone, but the future can still be shaped intentionally. This includes financial responsibility, which is enforced through child support laws, often supported and reinforced by Supreme Court decisions to protect children's well-being. Child support is not a punishment. It is a recognition that children must not suffer because of adult decisions. The law ensures that a child's needs, medical, educational, emotional, and daily living, are shared by both biological parents. However, parenting is not only financial. Emotional presence matters just as deeply. A child deserves acknowledgement, affirmation, and identity. The moment a child knows who their parent is, they gain a connection to heritage, personality, physical traits, medical history, and cultural background. These elements are foundational in a child's sense of self. Without them, identity can feel incomplete. In situations where the DNA results show that the suspected father is not biologically connected, another emotional transformation begins. Instead of responsibility being assigned, closure is offered. The individual is released from the emotional confusion of uncertainty. But this relief can also come with unexpected pain. If emotional bonds formed, even briefly, they must now be restructured or released. And the mother must return to the emotional journey of identifying biological truth, which may involve revisiting past choices, relationships, and unresolved memories. In these circumstances, people often turn to emotional healing frameworks similar to those shared in Celebrate Recovery testimonies. These testimonies focus on accepting past mistakes, seeking forgiveness, practicing accountability, and building new identity grounded in honesty. Healing cannot happen while denial remains. It requires acknowledging the decisions that brought everyone to this moment, without excuses, resentment, or emotional avoidance. This final stage of emotional transition also mirrors the lessons discussed in the Divorce Course podcast, where personal accountability becomes the anchor for rebuilding one's life. Whether the parents remain connected or separate, co-parenting demands maturity, stability, and self-control. They must now make decisions that prioritize the child's emotional health, rather than their own frustration or disappointment. Throughout this emotional and legal journey, the relationship between law and justice continues to stand at the center. Justice is not just about resolving disputes. It is about protecting the child's future. The court cannot force two individuals to like each other, trust each other, or agree with one another. But it can require them to act responsibly. That is where law supports justice. The legal system creates boundaries for behaviors, financial decisions, and parental obligations so that a child can have structure, even when the relationship between adults lacks harmony. The emotional truths, revealed in this case resemble patterns seen in cheating stories shared publicly. These stories often emphasize that betrayal creates wounds that last long beyond the moment of the act. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. However, emotional pain does not prevent a person from growing. It may become the motivation for change. It may inspire self-reflection, personal accountability, emotional discipline, or spiritual grounding. Pain, when acknowledged and processed, becomes transformation. There is also a connection to adoption stories, where identity and love are understood as layered, complex, and deeply human. Families formed through adoption show that one does not need DNA to love a child. But even in adoption, identity remains important. Many adopted individuals eventually seek knowledge of their origin, not to replace their adoptive family, but to understand themselves more completely. This reinforces why establishing biological truth for a child is not optional. Identity shapes mental health. Knowing one's story provides grounding. Through all of these dimensions, Judge Lauren Lake continues to act as both a legal guide and emotional stabilizer. She does not dismiss the emotional pain involved. She does not ignore the human side of the law, but she insists that clarity is a gift, even when it arrives painfully. Her courtroom is not a place of punishment. It is a place of resolution. It is where emotional uncertainty ends and direction begins. This story also emphasizes that relationships formed quickly, impulsively, or under emotional stress may not survive the weight of reality. Passion is temporary. Commitment is permanent. And raising a child requires the kind of maturity that is built through patience, effort, and stability, not momentary excitement or escape. What remains at the end of this journey is not just legal clarity, but emotional opportunity. The opportunity to learn. The opportunity to heal. The opportunity to grow. For the mother, this may involve rebuilding self-esteem, making healthier relationship choices, and focusing on stability for the child. For the father, this may involve embracing responsibility, fostering emotional maturity, and establishing consistent involvement in the child's life. For the child, it offers the chance to grow with clarity rather than confusion. And for everyone involved, it offers something even more valuable than answers. It offers closure. Closure is not forgetting. It is not pretending nothing happened. It is choosing to move forward with honesty, acceptance, and intention. Because once the truth is known, it becomes the foundation for everything that comes next. As the story progresses, the emotional weight surrounding the DNA test intensifies. It is no longer just a medical process or a legal requirement. It becomes a symbol of truth confronting fear. The individuals involved realize that their lives have been shaped by assumptions, hopes, and anxieties. And now they must prepare for a reality that could either restore their foundation or shatter it entirely. In Judge Lauren Lake's court, the DNA test is a turning point where love and law intersect. Revealing the true core of the relationship, the narrative broadens into an examination of how uncertain paternity affects identity and emotional stability. A child's place in the world is deeply tied to the sense of belonging, lineage, and security. The individuals grapple with fear not only of losing each other, but of disrupting the child's emotional foundation. The idea of family becomes layered. Family is not simply formed by blood, but by presence, loyalty, and emotional investment. Yet the law requires clarity. The court must determine biological truth before emotional truth can be addressed. This dynamic reflects the relationship between law and justice, where the law reveals the facts, and justice seeks to understand what those facts mean to the human heart. The couple begins to confront internal struggles that existed long before the DNA test. Wounds from childhood, patterns learned through survival rather than love, and the lessons taught by unstable family structures all surface. The partner who committed infidelity does not deny the past, but explains it as a manifestation of emotional instability and a lack of secure attachment. The act of cheating becomes symbolic of deeper emotional confusion rather than a merely careless betrayal. The narrative does not justify the act, but seeks to understand its origins. This psychological exploration mirrors the themes discussed on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where personal trauma often intersects with legal disputes and emotional decision-making. The other partner, the one who endured betrayal, represents resilience layered with vulnerability. Their choice to stay despite pain reflects the complexity of love, a love that tries to nurture healing rather than abandon the damaged parts of the relationship. Yet endurance also has emotional limits. The narrative explores how love can transform into emotional exhaustion when effort is not balanced by accountability and trust building. The courtroom becomes the place where these emotions finally find space to be acknowledged and validated. The involvement of Celebrate Recovery testimonies becomes relevant here, offering examples of individuals who faced emotional and relational collapse, only to rebuild through truth, forgiveness, and self-awareness. These testimonies help illustrate that healing from relational damage is not impossible, but it requires honesty, patience, empathy, and clear emotional boundaries. The couple must decide whether they will remain trapped in cycles of pain or choose to rebuild something new and emotionally grounded. As the legal process continues, discussions of Adverse Inference in Evidence Act highlight how the absence of transparent communication can shape judgment. When truth is withheld, avoided, or delayed, assumptions begin to take the place of actual evidence. In relationships, silence becomes its own kind of testimony. Trust cannot exist where transparency is absent. This realization becomes crucial for the couple, who must now learn how to communicate vulnerably and truthfully, without fear that truth itself will destroy what remains. Simultaneously, the narrative recalls cheating stories that shook relationships to the core, not for the sake of drama, but to illustrate how betrayal forces people to confront who they are, what they value, and what they fear losing. In each case, the ultimate struggle is not between partners, but between the individuals and their own emotional shadows. Healing relationships requires not only forgiveness from the hurt partner, but transformation from the partner who caused harm. The idea of the concept of justice in jurisprudence reappears as Judge Lauren Lake encourages the individuals to consider what justice truly means in their situation. Justice is not always about winning or losing. Sometimes it is about accountability, growth, and the willingness to rebuild trust slowly and intentionally. Justice here is emotional, spiritual, psychological, and relational, not simply legal. The judge emphasizes that families can be strengthened through truth if both individuals are willing to take responsibility for healing. Parallel to the emotional narrative, the story reflects on Adoption Stories full episodes, which remind us that family is deeply rooted in the emotional labor of love, stability, and commitment. A biological connection alone does not make someone a parent. Presence, nurturing, and devotion do. This truth becomes especially meaningful in the context of paternity uncertainty. The question arises, if the DNA test proves paternity, will love follow naturally or must it be rebuilt intentionally? If the DNA test disproves paternity, can emotional attachment still exist? These questions form the emotional depth of the narrative. The tension escalates as the individuals begin considering their future, regardless of the DNA result. If the test confirms paternity, the couple must rebuild trust, a process that requires empathy, communication, accountability, and emotional maturity. They must learn how to exist not as enemies or survivors of conflict, but as partners who speak honestly and listen deliberately. Therapy becomes a central tool for emotional rebuilding, allowing both individuals to explore their emotional history, their weaknesses, and their capacity for love and responsibility. If the test disproves paternity, they must face the reality of separation, co-parenting structures, financial obligations, and emotional distance. References to Supreme Court child support remind the individuals that legal responsibility follows truth, regardless of emotional desire. If paternity is not confirmed, the court will still act to ensure the child's needs are met, and the emotional repercussions will extend beyond the couple to their families, communities, and the child's sense of identity. During this stage of the narrative, the emotional landscape becomes more introspective. Both individuals reflect on their deepest fears, the fear of being alone, the fear of being unloved, the fear of repeating generational trauma, the fear of failing as parents. The DNA test is no longer just a medical document. It is a mirror reflecting everything they have avoided confronting within themselves. The story emphasizes that love is a choice continually made, not a static feeling. Trust must be earned through honesty. Healing requires willingness, not just regret. And truth, while sometimes painful, is always the beginning of growth. As tension builds toward the results, silence holds meaning. Every past decision, every painful moment, every act of hope, every tear, every memory, every apology now converges into a single moment that will define the future of this family. The narrative pauses here, at the emotional peak, where breath catches in the chest and the heart tightens with anticipation. Because what comes next is not just the result of a DNA test, but the result of every choice, every wound, every love, and every fear that brought them to this day. The story now arrives at the most defining emotional threshold, the moment where truth and fate meet. The courtroom atmosphere holds a quiet weight, not because of legal authority alone, but because each heart present understands that life will not continue the same after this point. Judge Lauren Lake represents both the firmness of law and the compassionate guidance of emotional truth, reminding everyone that honesty is not meant to break us, but to allow us to stand more solidly in our lives. The narrative does not revolve merely around the anticipation of a DNA test result, but around the emotional evolution that has taken place through this journey. Both individuals have undergone a transformation. The one who betrayed has truly confronted their emotional wounds, acknowledging that their past actions were born from instability, lack of self-worth, and an inherited misunderstanding of what love should look like. The one who was betrayed has confronted the internal weight of patience, loyalty, and the emotional fatigue of loving someone imperfectly, while carrying hope in one hand and heartbreak in the other. The story emphasizes that truth changes everything, not simply because it provides answers, but because it demands that those who receive it decide who they will be moving forward. The narrative reflects how many people in real relationships fear the truth because they believe it will destroy the fragile stability they have managed to build. Yet the story gently suggests that truth does not destroy what is real. It destroys only what was never built on honesty to begin with. As the emotional layers deepen, the individuals begin to see the value in vulnerability. Emotional healing requires admitting the pain, the fear, the insecurity, and the longing for stability. In this stage, the partner who committed infidelity recognizes that apologies are not enough. Change must be demonstrated daily, consistently and patiently. Trust is not restored instantly, and forgiveness is not a moment but a process. The partner who endured betrayal begins to understand that love cannot survive without boundaries and mutual respect. The emotional work ahead becomes clear. Healing is not passive. It is intentional and steady. The narrative continues reflecting on key themes discussed in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, the Divorce Course podcast, and broader discussions of the relationship between law and justice. These sources demonstrate how legal cases involving family relationships are not only about determining facts, they are about guiding individuals to understand themselves and one another. On deeper emotional and psychological levels, Judge Lauren Lake embodies this principle by ensuring that the individuals understand that whatever the test reveals, the emotional and relational work afterward is essential. The story also draws strength from Celebrate Recovery testimonies, reminding us that individuals can rise from their lowest emotional points when they commit to truth, accountability, and healing. The partner who caused hurt begins to embrace self-reflection, therapeutic support, and an honest acknowledgement of their emotional history. They recognize that they cannot return to old patterns, because to do so would be to repeat the same relational harm that has already caused deep damage. The narrative shifts slightly into a broader reflection on parenthood. What makes someone a parent is more than biology. It is presence, care, effort, devotion, and emotional investment. This idea connects closely with Adoption Stories full episodes, where families are formed and strengthened through love rather than DNA alone. Regardless of the result, the emotional truth is that the child deserves to be nurtured, loved, and raised in stability. The well-being of the child becomes the central core of the final stages of the story. Legal considerations surface once more, reflecting the importance of Supreme Court child support standards. The narrative acknowledges that the law protects the child first, ensuring that financial, emotional, and familial responsibilities are upheld, regardless of personal conflict. The individuals recognize that no matter the emotional pain or relational change, the child's stability and future must remain the highest priority. Meanwhile, the concept of adverse inference in evidence act highlights that when clarity is avoided, consequences may follow. Avoidance does not protect relationships. Transparency does. The individuals now understand that secrecy is not protection. Honesty is. Silence is not peace and communication is. Emotional distance is not neutrality. It is a slow unraveling. Through this realization, both individuals begin to see that the relationship they want to rebuild must be created through truth and vulnerability, rather than fear and emotional retreat. The emotional climax unfolds not through dramatic outbursts, but through profound internal acceptance. The truth of the DNA test is received not as an ending but as a beginning, whether that beginning is one of rebuilding together or rebuilding separately. The narrative emphasizes that growth does not always mean staying together. Sometimes growth means parting respectfully. Yet when the result reveals that the child is biologically connected to the parent who had been uncertain, a moment of quiet emotional release occurs. It is not a celebration of victory, but a release of fear, doubt, and emotional burden. There is no triumphant declaration, only a deep, steady understanding that love now has a chance to heal. The relationship has endured the fire of truth. Whether it thrives from this point depends not on the test result alone, but on the commitment to emotional maturity and communication. Judge Lauren Lake gently guides the couple to see that love requires work, intentionality, and empathy. The partner who caused harm must continue therapy and personal healing, recognizing that emotional patterns are not undone overnight. The partner who carried the pain must learn to reopen the heart slowly, carefully, trusting not words but actions. And both must remember that the child deserves a foundation built on emotional stability, not unresolved conflict. The narrative ends on a reflective note. The couple does not magically become perfect, nor does their healing become instantaneous. Instead, the story concludes with clarity, honesty, and direction. The future is not predetermined. It is something they will build through conscious choices, communication, honesty, and accountability. The child in the story represents hope, a future that can be guided by truth rather than fear. The couple stands not as the same individuals who entered the courtroom, but as two people who have learned the value of transparency, responsibility, and emotional growth. The final message of the story echoes softly but powerfully. Truth does not break families. Truth reveals which families were meant to be rebuilt. And in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, justice is not simply declared, and it is lived, practiced, and carried forward into every tomorrow.